destroy. God does acts of destruction. God's strange act. God destroys in the interest of salvation. God does not destroy the voice of Satan attacking the justice of God. The Thusia Multimedia Ministry. And you shall know the truth. The loud cry of the third angel's message to the world. So now, let us see the other point, where God himself actually is doing physical acts of destruction. This is direct retribution on the wicked. Now our first scripture, we turn to Exodus chapter 3, verse 19 and verse 20. Let us see and hear what God has to say. God says, "And I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go. No, not by a mighty hand. And I," Yahweh speaking here, "and I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with all my wonders which I will do in the midst thereof. And after that he will let you go." So God says he will stretch forth his hand. We know with the plagues of Egypt, God commanded Moses and Aaron to do certain acts of destruction. Okay? Some were natural, where nature itself acted out, and some naturally was God himself doing it. And also God did command an angel to smite the firstborn. So here in the plagues of Egypt, God commanded acts of destruction by his commanding will, by allowing the righteous to do the destruction. Also God himself did the acts of destruction. The forces of nature did the acts of destruction, and holy angels did the acts of destruction. So let's see now. God said, "I will stretch forth my hand." Exodus chapter 8, verse 16 to 19. God says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch out thy rod, and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt." And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod, and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man and in beast, and all the dust of the land became lice throughout the land of Egypt. Let's see what happens next. And the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there was lice upon man and upon beast. Then the magician said unto Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. So what we are seeing here, God himself did an act of destruction. Here you have sand and dust becoming alive with lice, and doing acts of destruction, stinging and discomforting the people of Egypt. This is an act of God himself doing it, brethren. This shows that God himself does acts of destruction. It couldn't be replicated by the magicians in the least possible way. So this shows that God does command acts of destruction, and that he himself does acts of destruction. Let's go on again and see more. We're looking at Exodus chapter 9. It says, verse 5, it says, "And the Lord appointed a set time, saying, Tomorrow the Lord shall do this thing in the land. And the Lord did that thing on the morrow, and all the cattle of Egypt died. But of the cattle of the children of Israel died not one. And the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron, take to you handfuls of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it towards the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. And it shall become small dust in all the land of Egypt, and it shall be a boil breaking forth with blains upon man, upon beast, throughout all the land of Egypt. And they took ashes of the furnace, and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses sprinkled it towards heaven, and it became a boil breaking forth, with blains upon man and upon beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boil was upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. So here you see God doing an act of destruction. He used the medium of dust as well as ashes, but he himself inflicted the retribution and the pain and the boils or the lice upon man and beast in the land of Egypt. So God does do acts of destruction. It is plain. Okay? So if one is to ever consider what God is doing in regards to destroying, we have it very clear. He has his permissive will, he has his commanding will, and he himself does acts of destruction. Now, let's see another one where God says some serious things here. Okay? Let's look at Exodus chapter 11 and chapter 12, and we'll see what's happening here. And Moses said, thus saith the Lord, about midnight will I go out in the midst of Egypt, and the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sitteth upon the throne, even unto the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the mill, and all the firstborn of beasts. Chapter 12, verse 29. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat upon the throne, unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the magicians, and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in the land of Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. So here we are seeing God himself doing acts of destruction. Let me emphasize some more. The direct act of God. You see, brethren, this is in contravention against Lucifer himself. The people who say God does not destroy, they are saying it is Satan alone that does all these acts of destruction. So therefore God withdraws his protection, and Satan does all these acts of destruction, and yet still God is getting the glory. I am saying no. God is in permissive will allow Lucifer to do the act of destruction. God is not partnering with Satan in doing acts of destruction. So in these things here, in the plagues of Egypt, it is God himself doing the act of destruction. It is not his permissive will of withdrawing his protection. He intervenes and does the act itself. God doesn't need Satan to do his work for him. God commands Lucifer to do acts of destruction, and it is his permissive will because God withdraws protection. But not always. God personally commands the destruction. And here God is doing it again. Leviticus chapter 10, verse 1, 2, and 3. It says, and Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer, and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And they went out from the Lord, and they went out fire from the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said unto Aaron, this is that which the Lord spake, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh unto me, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. So here God does an act of destruction and killing men, the priests, because they did not do the thing he commanded them to do. God is against sin and disobedience, my brethren. He will always punish the wicked, those who reject God's grace and ordinance of love. He will destroy them, as these men did. So you cannot say God doesn't do acts of destruction. He does it. He intervenes and personally does the act of destruction. Here's another one in Numbers 16, verse 19 to 22. It says, "And Korah gathered all the congregation against them unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And the glory of their Lord Yahweh appeared unto all the congregation. And Yahweh spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell upon their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will thou be wrath with all the congregation? And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the congregation, saying, Get up from about the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Moses rose up and went unto Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spake unto the congregation, saying, Depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of them, lest ye be consumed in all their sins. So they got up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out, and stood in the door of their tents, and their wives, and their sons, and their little children. And Moses said, Hereby ye shall know that the Lord hath sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them on mine own mind. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth, and swallow them up, with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. And the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertain unto Korah, and all their goods. They and all that appertain to them, they went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed up them upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. And all Israel that were round about them fled at the cry of them, for they said, Lest the earth swallow us up also. And there came out a fire from the Lord, and consumed the 250 men that offered incense. So, what we are seeing here, clear and straight, God does do acts of destruction personally. So at least, brethren, these scriptures clears the matter carefully. We must not concede to the wickedness and to the pervertedness of the God does not destroy doctrine. We must not say that God only withdraws his protection and allows Satan to do evil. That is one way in which God does acts of destruction. It is his permissive will. But we also have God's commanding will, where he commands righteous men, governments of the earth, and holy angels to do acts of destruction, even the forces of nature, as we see with the flood, and also the fire that came down from heaven and consumed Sodom and Gomorrah. Yes, God does those things. He uses the forces of nature. He uses the sun, the wind, you see, water, everything he does, whirlwinds, hurricanes. God allowed these things to happen. For what reason? That wicked men may know that Yahweh is the true God, the God of justice, the God of retribution. While God is patient and long-suffering and forbearing to wicked men, he puts retribution upon them ever so often, that men may come to recognize the mercies of God. So God so often does retribution upon the earth, that men may come to recognize his justice, and that God hates sin. So my dear brethren, let this be a reminder to you. Get these truths clear. Study the scriptures. Go further into them. does destroy. God does acts of destruction. God's strange act. God destroys in the interest of salvation.